Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The late afternoon sun filtered through the heavy drapes of the Quartermaine mansion, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany floors. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only a family as storied and fractured as the Quartermaines could muster. The grand living room, usually a stage for heated arguments or lavish parties, was now a somber arena where the family gathered to hear the final wishes of Monica Quartermaine, the matriarch who had held their chaotic dynasty together for decades. Monica's sudden passing had left a void in Port Charles, and today, her will would reveal how she intended to shape the future from beyond the grave. Tracy Quartermaine sat rigidly on the edge of a velvet-upholstered armchair, her posture impeccable despite the storm brewing inside her. At 65, Tracy remained a formidable presence, sharp-tongued, impeccably dressed, and fiercely protective of her family's legacy. Her eyes, narrowed with suspicion, darted between her relatives, each of whom seemed to carry their own agenda. Edward Quartermaine, her late father, had taught her that in this family, trust was a luxury no one could afford. And now, with Monica gone, Tracy felt the weight of that lesson more acutely than ever. Across the room, Ned Quartermaine, Tracy's son, leaned against the fireplace mantel, his arms crossed. His face was a mask of stoic calm, but Tracy knew better. Ned was calculating, always had been. He'd been Monica's confidant in recent years, and Tracy couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about the will than he let on. Beside him stood Olivia Falconeri, his wife, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Olivia's warmth and sincerity were out of place in this den of vipers, and Tracy wondered how long it would take for the Quartermaines to chew her up and spit her out. Michael Corinthos, Monica's grandson, sat on the sofa, his jaw clenched. His wife, Willow, rested a gentle hand on his arm, her presence a quiet anchor in the room's charged atmosphere. Michael had inherited Monica's compassion but also her stubborn streak, and Tracy knew he'd fight tooth and nail for whatever he believed was his birthright. Next to them, Brooklyn Quartermaine, Ned's daughter, scrolled absently on her phone, but her casual demeanor didn't fool Tracy. Brooklyn was as cunning as her grandmother, and Tracy had no doubt she was plotting her next move. The lawyer, Diane Miller, stood at the head of the room, her sleek black suit a stark contrast to the ornate surroundings. Diane was no stranger to the Quartermaines' drama, she'd navigated their legal battles for years, but even she seemed unusually somber as she adjusted her glasses and opened the leather-bound folder containing Monica's will. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Thank you all for coming," Diane began, her voice steady but measured. "As you know, we're here to read the last will and testament of Monica Quartermaine. I ask that you hold any questions or comments until I've finished." Tracy's fingers tightened around the armrests of her chair. She'd never been one for patience, and the anticipation was eating at her. Monica had been her sister-in-law, her rival, and, in rare moments, her ally. Their relationship had been a battlefield of sharp words and grudging respect, but Tracy had always assumed Monica's will would follow the predictable lines of Quartermaine tradition, the bulk of the estate to the family, with a few charitable bequests to appease Monica's bleeding heart. Yet something in Diane's tone set Tracy's nerves on edge. Diane cleared her throat and began reading. "I, Monica Quartermaine, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The words washed over Tracy as Diane detailed the preliminary bequests, a generous donation to General Hospital, where Monica had dedicated her life as a cardiologist, a trust fund for her great-grandchildren, Wiley and Amelia, and a collection of personal effects to be distributed among her children and grandchildren. Tracy's mind wandered, her thoughts drifting to the countless battles she and Monica had fought over the years, over ELQ, over Alan, over the very soul of the Quartermaine family. Monica had always been the moral compass, the one who believed in redemption and second chances, while Tracy saw the world in stark terms, win or lose, no middle ground. "And to my sister-in-law, Tracy Quartermaine," Diane's voice cut through Tracy's reverie, snapping her back to the present. Every head in the room turned toward her, and Tracy felt a prickle of unease. She straightened, her chin lifting defiantly as she met Diane's gaze. Diane continued, her voice unwavering. "I leave my shares in ELQ, comprising 35% of the company, to be held in trust for a period of 5 years, during which time Tracy Quartermaine shall act as the sole trustee, with full voting rights and authority over said shares." A murmur rippled through the room. Tracy's heart skipped a beat. 35% of ELQ was a controlling stake, a power that could shift the balance of the company and the family irrevocably. She felt Ned's eyes boring into her, but she kept her gaze fixed on Diane, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch with Monica. But, Diane said, and Tracy's stomach tightened, this bequest comes with a condition. Tracy must work alongside a co-trustee, to be chosen by the board of directors, to ensure that ELQ's mission aligns with the values I have always championed: integrity, innovation, and community. Should Tracy fail to comply with this condition, the shares will be redistributed equally among my surviving children and grandchildren. The room erupted. Ned was on his feet, his voice sharp. What does that even mean? A co-trustee? Who's the board going to pick? Michael's voice followed, low but intense. This is Monica's way of keeping ELQ out of a single person's control. She didn't trust any of us to run it alone. Tracy's mind raced. A co-trustee? Monica had always been a master of checks and balances, but this felt like a personal jab. To give Tracy power, only to shackle her with an overseer? It was vintage Monica, generous on the surface, manipulative underneath. Tracy's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd spent decades fighting for control of ELQ, and now Monica was dangling it in front of her like a carrot, only to tie her hands. Diane raised a hand for silence. There's more, she said, her tone carrying a weight that made Tracy's chest tighten. To my sister-in-law, Tracy Quartermaine, I also leave my personal journal, which contains my reflections on our family's history and my hopes for its future. I ask that Tracy read it and honor its contents in her stewardship of ELQ. A journal? Tracy's mind reeled. Monica had never been one for sentimentality, yet here she was, bequeathing a diary like some Victorian heroine. What game was Monica playing? Tracy's fingers twitched, itching to get her hands on the journal, if only to uncover whatever trap Monica had set. Diane continued, her voice growing softer, almost hesitant. And finally, to my beloved family, I leave a letter, to be read aloud by Diane Miller upon the completion of this will. The room stilled again. Tracy's breath caught in her throat. A letter? Monica had always been private, her emotions guarded behind her professional demeanor. The idea of her leaving a personal message felt unnatural. Vulnerable. Tracy didn't like it. Diane pulled a sealed envelope from her folder, broke the wax seal, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the page briefly before she began to read. My dearest family, Diane began, her voice carrying Monica's cadence, as if the matriarch herself were speaking. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and I hope you're all together, even if you're fighting. That's what we Quartermaines do best, isn't it? Fight, love, betray, forgive. I've spent my life trying to hold this family together, and I know I haven't always succeeded. But I've never stopped believing in you, not in your potential, not in your hearts. Tracy's throat tightened, and she cursed herself for it. She didn't do tears. She didn't do feelings. But Monica's words, delivered through Diane's steady voice, cut deeper than she'd expected. I've made mistakes, the letter continued. I've held grudges, pushed people away, and let pride get in the way of love. But I've also seen the best of you, Ned's loyalty, Michael's compassion, Brooklyn's spirit, Tracy's strength. Yes, Tracy, your strength. You've always been the backbone of this family, even when you didn't want to be. I know we've clashed, but I've always admired your fire. I'm giving you ELQ because I trust you to protect it, not for yourself, but for all of us. Tracy's vision blurred, and she blinked furiously, refusing to let the tears fall. Monica admired her? Trusted her? The words felt like a betrayal of everything Tracy thought she knew about their relationship. She wanted to scream, to demand why Monica hadn't said this when she was alive, when they could have hashed it out over martinis and sarcasm. But Monica was gone, and all Tracy had was this letter, this journal, this impossible responsibility. Diane's voice wavered as she read the final lines. I have one last secret to share, one I've kept for too long. In my journal, you'll find the truth about a decision I made years ago, one that changed the course of our family. Tracy, I'm asking you to read it first, to decide how to share it with the others. It's not an easy truth, but I believe you're strong enough to carry it. I love you all, more than you'll ever know. Be kind to each other. Be brave. Be Quartermaines. The room was silent, the weight of Monica's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Tracy felt the ground shift beneath her. A secret? What could Monica have hidden that was so monumental she'd saved it for her deathbed? Tracy's mind raced through the possibilities, affairs, betrayals, hidden heirs, but none felt right. Monica wasn't one for melodrama, not like this. Ned was the first to break the silence, his voice tight. What secret? What is she talking about? Diane folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That's all I have, she said. The journal is in my office, Tracy. You can pick it up whenever you're ready. Tracy didn't respond. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. She stood, intending to excuse herself, to escape the suffocating weight of her family's stares, but the room spun violently. Monica's words echoed in her head, strength, trust, secret, and her knees buckled. She heard Olivia gasp, felt Ned's hands catch her as she fell, and then everything went black. When Tracy came to, she was lying on the sofa, a cold compress on her forehead. Olivia hovered nearby, her face etched with concern, while Ned knelt beside her, his expression a mix of worry and frustration. "Mother, are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Tracy swatted the compress away and sat up, ignoring the dizziness that lingered. "I'm fine," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "I just needed a moment." "You fainted," Michael said, his tone gentle but firm. "That's not nothing." Tracy glared at him, but her heart wasn't in it. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't in years. Monica's letter had stripped her bare, and the mention of a secret Tracy was now responsible for, felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could bear. "I need that journal," Tracy said, her voice steadying. "Diane, when can I get it?" "Tomorrow morning," Diane replied. "I'll have it ready for you." Tracy nodded, her mind already racing. Whatever Monica had hidden, Tracy would find it. And if it was as earth-shattering as Monica implied, Tracy would decide what to do with it, whether to share it, bury it, or use it to protect the family she'd spent her life fighting for. The next morning, Tracy arrived at Diane's office before the sun had fully risen. Port Charles was quiet, the streets still cloaked in dawn's gray light. Diane handed her a leather-bound journal, its pages worn but intact, and Tracy felt a chill as her fingers closed around it. This was Monica's voice, her truth, her final act of control. Back at the mansion, Tracy locked herself in the study, the journal resting on the desk before her. She poured a glass of scotch, took a fortifying sip, and opened the cover. Monica's handwriting filled the pages, precise and elegant, a reflection of the woman herself. Tracy skimmed the early entries, memories of Alan, struggles with the hospital, regrets over lost time with her children. But as she reached the later pages, her breath caught. There, in Monica's careful script, was the secret she'd hinted at in her letter. It wasn't an affair or a betrayal, but something far more devastating, a decision Monica had made decades ago, one that had altered the course of the Quartermaine family forever. As Tracy read, her hands trembled, the words blurring through tears she could no longer hold back. Monica had written about a child, a son she'd given up for adoption before she'd married Alan, before she'd become a Quartermaine. The boy had been born out of wedlock, the result of a brief, passionate affair with a man Monica refused to name. She'd kept the pregnancy a secret, even from her closest confidants, and arranged for the child to be raised by a family far from Port Charles. But in her final years, Monica had tracked him down, learned he was alive and thriving, and wrestled with whether to bring him into the fold. The journal detailed Monica's guilt, her fear that revealing the truth would tear the family apart. She'd chosen silence, but in her will, she'd placed the burden on Tracy to decide the child's fate. Included in the journal was a sealed envelope with the man's name and address, along with a letter Monica had written to him but never sent. Tracy closed the journal, her mind spinning. A brother? A cousin? Another Quartermaine out there in the world, unaware of his heritage? The implications were staggering. If this man was brought into the family, he could claim a share of ELQ, disrupt the fragile balance of power, and reopen old wounds. But if Tracy kept the secret, she'd be betraying Monica's trust, the trust Monica had placed in her strength. For the first time in her life, Tracy didn't know what to do. She thought of Ned, of Michael, of Brooklyn, of the legacy they all fought for. She thought of Monica, who'd believed in her even when Tracy hadn't believed in herself. And she thought of the man out there, a stranger who carried Quartermaine blood. Tracy poured another glass of scotch and stared at the envelope. The decision was hers, and hers alone. But whatever she chose, the Quartermaine family would never be the same. Over the next few weeks, Tracy grappled with the secret, her days consumed by the journal's weight. She read and reread Monica's words, searching for clarity, but found only more questions. Should she contact the man? Should she tell the family? Each option carried risks, and Tracy, who'd spent her life calculating every move, felt paralyzed. Ned noticed her distraction, pressing her for answers she wasn't ready to give. "Mother, what's in that journal?" he asked one evening, cornering her in the mansion's library. "You've been different since the reading. What did Monica tell you?" Tracy deflected, her voice sharp. "It's none of your business, Ned. Monica left it to me, not you." But Ned wasn't fooled. "If it affects ELQ, it's all of our business. You heard Diane, those shares come with strings. What's Monica holding over you?" Tracy wanted to snap back, to shut him down with her usual venom, but she couldn't. Ned was right. The secret wasn't just about her, it was about all of them. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to share it, not yet. Meanwhile, the board of directors was moving forward with selecting a co-trustee for ELQ. Tracy attended the meetings, her mind only half present, as names were proposed and debated. To her surprise, the board settled on Olivia, citing her impartiality and her connection to the family through Ned. Tracy bristled at the choice. Olivia was an outsider, a falconary, not a true Quartermaine, but she couldn't deny the logic. Olivia's heart was in the right place, even if her lack of ruthlessness worried Tracy. As the deadline for accepting the co-trustee arrangement approached, Tracy knew she couldn't delay her decision about the journal any longer. She sat alone in her room one night, the envelope in her hands, and made a choice. She would find the man, Monica's son, and meet him herself. She wouldn't tell the family, not until she knew who he was, what he wanted, and whether he could handle the chaos of being a Quartermaine. Using her considerable resources, Tracy hired a private investigator to track down the man, whose name, according to the envelope, was Daniel Harper. Within days, she had an address, a modest house in a small town in upstate New York. Tracy drove there alone, her heart pounding as she knocked on the door. Daniel was in his late 40s, with dark hair and eyes that reminded Tracy unnervingly of Alan. He was a history professor, soft-spoken and unassuming, with no inkling of his true heritage. Tracy introduced herself as a friend of his biological mother, testing the waters. Daniel was curious but cautious, admitting he'd always wondered about his birth parents but had never pursued the truth. "I don't know if I'm ready to open that door," he told her over coffee in his cozy living room. "I have a life here, a family. What could knowing change?" Tracy studied him, searching for the Quartermaine fire. She saw glimpses of it, his sharp intellect, his quiet determination, but he lacked the hunger, the ambition that defined her family. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe Monica had wanted him to have a life free of their chaos. She left without revealing the full truth, promising to stay in touch. As she drove back to Port Charles, Tracy felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Daniel wasn't a threat, not yet, but he was a loose end, a variable she couldn't control. And Tracy hated variables. Back in Port Charles, the Quartermaines were fracturing. Ned and Michael clashed over ELQ's direction, with Ned pushing for aggressive expansion and Michael advocating for Monica's community-focused vision. Brooklyn, caught in the middle, tried to mediate but ended up alienating both. Olivia, now officially the co-trustee, struggled to assert her authority, her lack of experience a constant point of contention. Tracy watched it all unfold, her mind still on Daniel. She'd hidden the journal in a safe, but its presence loomed over her. Monica's words, be kind, be brave, be Quartermaines, echoed in her mind, a challenge she wasn't sure she could meet. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Tracy called a family meeting. The Quartermaines gathered in the living room, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Tracy stood before them, the journal in her hands, and took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Monica left me more than ELQ. She left me a secret, one that could change everything." As she spoke, Tracy felt the weight of Monica's trust, the burden of her legacy. She didn't know if she was making the right choice, but she knew one thing, the Quartermaines would survive. They always did. And so, she told them about Daniel. And Monica, the beloved doctor, the widow of the golden boy Alan, had never truly accepted her. This will was the ultimate proof. It was Monica's final judgment, her eternal statement that Tracy's brand of strength, pragmatic, unsentimental, sometimes ruthless, was not the kind she wanted guiding her family's future. She had chosen Michael's bruised morality, his complicated but ultimately soft heart, over Tracy's sharp clarity. She had chosen a child's unknown future over Tracy's proven, capable hands. It was a rejection that went beyond money and property. It was a rejection of Tracy's very essence. When they arrived at the mansion, Tracy refused further help, walking on her own steam through the grand front door. The familiar surroundings, usually a source of comfort and pride, now felt alien, almost accusatory. Every portrait, every piece of furniture, seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here anymore." She retreated to her old rooms, dismissing Ned with a wave of her hand. "I just need to lie down," she said, her voice hollow. Alone, the full force of the devastation finally hit her. It wasn't just anger, it was a grief so profound it was paralyzing. She had lost Monica, a constant and defining figure in her life. And in losing her, she had lost everything else. Her future, her purpose, her identity. She was untethered, adrift in a sea of betrayal and loss. The days that followed were a blur of misery and isolation. Tracy became a ghost in the mansion she once commanded. She refused meals, ignored phone calls, and lashed out at anyone who dared to offer sympathy. The family tiptoed around her, unsure how to handle this broken version of their usually formidable pillar. Her first real conversation was with Ned, a few days later. He found her in the solarium, staring blankly at the thriving orchids Monica had so loved. "We have to talk about it, Tracy," he said gently, taking a seat beside her. "What is there to talk about?" she replied, her voice flat. She gave it all away. To them. "It's done. We can contest it," Ned offered. "We can argue undue influence, or that she wasn't of sound mind." Tracy shook her head, a slow, weary movement. "No. We can't. You heard Thornhill. It was recent. She was of perfectly sound mind. She knew exactly what she was doing." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "She meant to do this, Ned. She wanted me to know, in no uncertain terms, that I was not her choice. That I was never good enough." The raw pain in her admission was heartbreaking. Ned reached out and took her hand. "That's not true, Tracy. You know that's not true. Monica loved you, in her way. This was about her, not you. It was about her vision for the future. Her vision was to hand my birthright to a Corinthos," Tracy spat, a flicker of her old fire returning. "She has destroyed this family. Michael is a good man, in his way, but he is not a Quartermaine. He's a Corinthos. And that child, the company will be bled dry by the time he's of age. She's sacrificed generations of legacy on the altar of her own sentimental guilt over not being a better grandmother to Michael when he was young. It's pathetic." But the anger was a brittle shield, and it quickly crumbled, leaving the desolation exposed once more. The conversation ended where it began, in a place of hopeless acceptance. The next challenge was the inevitable meeting with Michael and Willow. They came to the mansion a week after the reading, their expressions a careful mix of sympathy and awkwardness. They held the deed to the house. They held the future of the company. They were, effectively, her landlords and her bosses. Willow, ever the diplomat, spoke first. "Tracy, we are so sorry about everything. We know how much you loved Monica, and how much this house means to you." Tracy sat in a high-backed chair, regarding them as if they were petitioners, not the new owners. "Do you?" she asked, her tone icy. Michael, less inclined to tiptoe, met her gaze. "We didn't ask for this, Tracy. We were as shocked as you were." "I highly doubt that," she retorted. "Shock implies a lack of anticipation. I find it hard to believe this was never discussed." "It wasn't," Michael said firmly. "Monica made her own decisions. We respected her, and we intend to respect her wishes." "Of course you do," Tracy said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "They are exceptionally generous wishes toward you." The meeting was tense and unproductive. Michael and Willow assured her that she was welcome to stay in the mansion for as long as she liked, a concession that felt like alms given to a beggar. They spoke of a smooth transition at ELQ, of wanting to work with the existing board, of valuing her experience. The words were polite, but to Tracy, they were the terms of her surrender. She was being offered a courtesy title, an advisory role, a corner office with no real power. She was being put out to pasture. After they left, a new emotion began to germinate in the barren soil of her grief, a cold, hard, and focused rage. The initial shock had worn off, and the profound hurt was slowly being forged into a weapon of resentment. Monica was gone, beyond her reach. But Michael and Willow were here. The will was a legal document, but its implementation was not yet a done deal. The game was not over, it had simply changed. Tracy Quartermaine had been knocked down, but she was not out. She had spent a lifetime fighting for what was hers. She had navigated corporate takeovers, romantic betrayals, family scandals, and personal losses with a tenacity that was legendary in Port Charles. This was not the end. This was merely the opening move in a new, much more personal war. She would not contest the will. That was a loser's strategy, a public admission of defeat. No, she would work within the new framework Monica had so foolishly established. She would be the helpful aunt, the experienced advisor. She would bide her time. She would look for weaknesses, for cracks in the foundation of Michael and Willow's stewardship. Running a multi-billion-dollar corporation was not the same as running a nightclub or teaching school. They would make mistakes. They would be in over their heads. And when they did, Tracy would be there. Not to help, but to reclaim what was stolen from her. The feint in the lawyer's office was a moment of ultimate vulnerability, a moment she would never allow anyone to see again. From now on, the world would see only the indomitable Tracy Quartermaine, sharper, harder, and more determined than ever. She walked to the window and looked out over the vast grounds of the estate, her estate, no matter what any piece of paper said. The grief was still there, a cold stone in her chest. The betrayal still ached like a fresh wound. But now, there was purpose. A dark, simmering purpose. "You thought you could be rid of me, Monica," she whispered to the empty room, her reflection a ghost in the glass. "You thought you could write me out of the story. But you forgot one thing." A slow, calculated smile, the first in days, spread across her face. It didn't reach her eyes. "I've always been a much better fighter than you.